have been impressed by what Sheriff Adam Fortney has done in Snohomish County. I've been impressed by the fact that he seems to have been able to bring people in from both sides of the political spectrum and try to get them rowing in the same direction on public safety. And it's why I was so, I think angry is the word. I think angry is the word by an article in the Everett Herald. And this is a news article, by the way. This is not an opinion piece or something like that. And it wasn't just the article in the Everett Herald. It was also the reporter's tweet that accompanied the article in the Everett Herald. So let me show you, and again, I'll just put them side by side because to me, the article was almost, the tweet was almost worse than the article. So the reporter's name is Jordan Hansen. And his tweet of his story, and it was a very lengthy story about the race, comparing both of the candidates, Adam Fortney and Susanna Johnson, who's the current deputy chief in Bothell. But this is how he framed it, and it's very telling to me. He said, a controversial far-right sheriff with constitutional leanings is being challenged by his former co-worker, a cop with 3 decades of experience in the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. Just think about that for a second. Look at the way that he's framing Adam Fortney versus the way that he's framing Adam Fortney's opponent. A controversial far-right sheriff with constitutional leanings versus a cop with 3 decades of experience in the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. Clearly, there is a bias there. Clearly, there is an effort to fearmonger when it comes to Adam Fortney by labeling him far right. Do you ever hear the media label candidates far left? I never hear that. Yet the phrase far right is used so liberally. And then to say, oh, versus a cop with 3 decades of experience. And it really, I guess, just hit me because remember last week, the Washington State Democratic Party was calling me far right. I'm not even a Republican. I'm not even running for anything. Why are you so concerned with me? I mean, they were sending out campaign fundraising emails, fear-mongering off me, calling me far right. And so the labeling of that has become, it's one thing if politicians and political campaigns want to label far right, right wing, both sides do that, left wing, socialist, Marxist. The goal is always with political campaigns to paint the other person as an extreme, crazy individual who will ruin our communities. But when the media does it, I think that's when it rises to a level of being deeply bothersome to me. And then throughout this whole article, again, which was a very lengthy article, there was a lot of room in this article to talk about some of the many positive things that Sheriff Fortney has done over the past 4 years and with public safety. But it highlights, I'm not going to read all this, but I just pulled out a few because, again, it's an intentional bias to turn people against Adam Fortney by tying him, even in very loose ways, to extremists. For instance, they noted that Fortney has doubled down on defending some of his most controversial decisions. And one of the most controversial decisions they name is him criticizing Governor Jay Inslee's stay-at-home mandates. Which, is that so controversial in hindsight? No, he was on the right side of history. And then they bring up that he had, again, they use the word controversial Sheriff Mark Lamb of Arizona. The fact that Fortney had a campaign event in July and Mark Lamb was there, tying Lamb to the constitutional sheriff's movement, an ideology that believes sheriffs to be the ultimate law enforcement authority. And then they go on to also criticize Adam Fortney signing on to a letter pledging to protect the Second Amendment in the face of gun control legislation. So again, they're trying to manipulate people's emotions who have been conditioned by the media to be absolutely terrified of anything with the word Constitution in it and anything that's right of center. And then this one was the one that really got me the most because it seems like it was included for no reason other than to fearmonger. It says, amid a bogus threat that Antifa rioters would descend on Snohomish, at least 100 people came armed to protect the city's downtown in June of 2020. Some wore symbols of far-right groups, including the Proud Boys. Fortney spoke with 2 groups of armed locals and reported that they were not white nationalists, they were not extremists. So because Fortney, and by the way, he told the group to leave law enforcement up to law enforcement. He told the group to stand down, that they didn't need to be there armed protecting downtown. But just because they came to Snohomish County and some of them had symbols of far-right groups, including the Proud Boys, Adam Fortney has to absorb that? That doesn't make any sense at all. And so I stewed on this a little, and I had seen Adam Fortney at an event Nicole and I were both at over the weekend. We go to it every year. It's the Stronger Families Foundation Gala, and it's an event and an organization benefiting the families of first responders. Wonderful organization. Adam Fortney and his wife were there. And I got to tell you, I was just talking to him about this freaking article, and I decided, like, we're not going to sit this one out, because it's bigger than Adam Fortney at this point. It's bigger than this single race. It is about wholesale rejecting the politics of fear, the fear-mongering of labels that has become so ingrained in our political races, to the point where now you have the media that uses those same labels, that's using the same labels that the left employs, doing the dirty work, essentially, for the left and for Democrats and for Sheriff Fortney's opponent. And it's not right. I'm really against the media using those labels unless they can pinpoint the exact reason why, because those labels are subjective. Far right, far left, right wing, left wing. They're subjective based on the person who's using them and where they fall on the ideological spectrum. So anyway, we decided that if the Everett Herald is going to put its foot on the scales a week out from the election, that we're going to do our best to pry their foot off the scales. So today, this is our call to action today, we are going to be sign waving for Sheriff Adam Fortney in Linwood on the corner of 196th and 44th near the Fred Meyer from 3:30 until 5 p.m. So we're going to be there. And again, I very rarely get involved in political races or endorse political candidates. But this is not just, I do think Adam Fortney has done a good job as the sheriff. And I do think he has been willing to put absolute, utter nonsense aside in the interest of public safety. But it also has to do with saying we are not going to accept the fact that these races that should be focused on the life or death consequences of this particular race, of what's happening with public safety, that it should be focused on that. We're not going to allow it to be focused on these red herrings, on these labels that are intended to fearmonger. And so we also, by the way, wanted to invite Sheriff Adam Fortney on the show today to talk and have him not only react to this piece, which I could tell bothered him. You know, for a guy that's not bothered by a lot, I could tell it bothered him. And he was surprised by it, even coming from the Everett Herald. And we also want to talk about the event that we're going to have coming up in just 3 hours. Here he is. Sheriff Adam Fortney, welcome back to unDivided.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I'll talk more about our little event we're going to have today in a moment. But the Everett Herald article that I think sparked, some renewed interest in what's happening and the way that this race has been framed, this particular reporter had spent a lot of time, several hours at an event with you, the Everett mayor, who's a Democrat, and some other officials, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, he just a couple weeks ago, actually, I didn't know this reporter, but met him, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to come to this event." It was a public event, so I'm totally okay with that. And he actually surprised because we didn't have a chance to talk beforehand. Just there was too much going on, and he was talking to one of the business owners that was there that I have a 4-year relationship with in South Everett. And then it surprised me. He stayed for over 2 hours at this event, and the events are. It's not just me up there talking. We did have Mayor Cassie Franklin there from the city of Everett, a Democrat, and we had a Republican, John Nearing, from the city of Marysville. And the difference is with that is, everybody wants to show they're bipartisan and everybody talks that talk. But I think I've shown it over the last 4 years, and that was kind of the thought process behind this event. And the difference between, I think, me and if we're going to get into my opponent, all that kind of stuff, is that although they're both on different sides of the political aisle, if you will, they've been pro-public safety for the entire time I've been in office. And we have a great working relationship. So they're strong enough to not worry about the politics, as you can see what we're talking about today. And so, yeah, this reporter was there the whole time and got to hear basically the rundown of the last 4 years of what we've been able to bring to Snohomish County. And then I see that headline in his article and I'm like, ugh. I should have learned this quite a while ago, Brandi, but I keep giving in and talking to people and think it's going to change, but it's not going to change.
Yeah, so here you guys have this bipartisan event where you're all talking about some of the wonderful steps towards trying to deal with the public safety crisis that the entire state is in right now. And you don't see a lot of that reflected in what was a really lengthy piece. So was there still a bit of you that was surprised by that he could hear all of that good stuff and not have that play more of a role in the article?
Oh yeah, and look, it surprises me on a human being level, Brandi. And what I mean by that is I mean, I looked this kid in the eye and talked to him, right? And then not only that, he had more follow-up questions on email, which I have no problem with. I think that's fair. I responded to him, right? And then for him to hear from us and kind of get to know me at least a little bit, as much as you can in that context, and then come out with that headline, it's just the same old stuff I've dealt with for 4 years here. I'm kind of bored with it, to be honest with you, from the Everett Herald. It's like, what do I have to, I don't know what I have to do. So yeah, that part is very frustrating. So I shouldn't have been surprised, but I still was, I guess, because I've given the Everett Herald a fair shake. People think that, I've been on social media or something, I'm just there to blow them out. It's not been the case. I have given them hours and hours and hours of my time during my first 4 years in office, even after not getting a fair shake. And I kept trying, but it just didn't work out for me.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was the reporter's tweet more than even the article. A controversial far-right sheriff with constitutional leanings is being challenged by his former coworker, a cop with 3 decades of experience. I mean, how'd that strike you? To the juxtaposition that is made in that tweet?
I'll be honest, it's painful. It is painful, personally and professionally, because that's not what I brought to Snohomish County at all. It is not representative of who I am. Well, I do lean towards the Constitution. I will own that every minute of the day. But that's not a bad thing, But he framed it as a negative, and it's hard. It's hard, I'm living kind of the life right now with this political thing, and I asked for it. I got in this game, so it's kind of a complaint, but it is what it is. This is why good people, I think, regular folks, don't get into this game. I'm living it right now. They are into, and I include the Everett Herald in this, and I include my opponent in this. They're into the politics of personal destruction, and I'm not going to play that game. I haven't played that game. I think I've been fair. I have contrasted with my opponent on like policy stuff that she has done. People forget she has a record at the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. She's one of the reasons I won in 2019. She was a very high-ranking Sheriff's Office person, and so, but none of that's been covered, And I don't know how many people read the Everett Herald to this day. I don't know, but they still have some impact. It's not okay the way they're framing it.
Well, and the way I see it, the reason why now this has really pissed me off, to be honest, is, I'm coming off a week of where the Washington State Democratic Party put out a fundraising email calling me far right. And I'm like, I'm not even running for something. Like, leave me alone. And it's this fear tactic that they're trying to, appeal to this sentiment that has really been baked in for people who watch the news, that like anything right of center is really bad and scary. And there's a reason they do that. But I'll ask you, the constitutional leanings thing, which I also had a good laugh at. I'm like, constitutional leanings, does the opponent lean away from the Constitution? I guess I'm not curious. But what they get to in the article is he tries to tie you to the constitutional sheriffs movement, which is essentially a movement where you have sheriffs who believe that they are the ultimate, law enforcement authority, and that if there are laws that are, for instance, they believe against the Constitution, then they refuse to enforce them. So what ties, if any, do you have to that movement?
None. That's the whole thing. Listen, I'll tell everybody this, that I've been asked this question a lot.
Yeah.
We've been campaigning for a year. This is one of the questions that comes up. And I describe it this way. I took an oath, believe it or not, at 17 years old when I joined the Navy. And then I took an oath in 1996 when I started this job almost 30 years ago. And I am perfectly comfortable with my oath, my obligation to that oath to both the state and the U.S. Constitution. And no one's going to take that away from me. And I certainly don't need an outside sheriff organization to come in and tell me whether I'm doing it right or not. And the funny thing about this whole thing, Brandi, is that's not a right-wing or left-wing statement. And I think almost any police executive who swears that same oath would say what I just said. No, I don't need any. I'm perfectly comfortable with my oath to the U.S. Constitution. So that's kind of it.
Yeah, because one of the things because you had Mark Lamb, who's a Arizona sheriff and he's controversial. Do you regret having him in or appearing at an event with him?
No, but there's something I missed with that. I missed the controversy, I guess. Man, my wife and I and a couple of command staff went out to his wife and him when he came up here. They are like fantastic people, Brandi. And again, I get that they're trying to tie me to him and the right wing stuff. I am not going to play that game. Everybody, whether you're on the right or left, will get a fair shake from Adam Fortney as the sheriff if you're a good person doing good things in your community. And if there's some political statements you had made at some point, but you still want to get in the room and talk, I'm going to get in a room and talk with somebody. So absolutely not. I'm going to stand by him. And you know what? Maybe that doesn't help me politically in the long run. But man, Brandi, this is a good man, a good family. He is doing wonderful things when it comes to public safety in his home county in Arizona. And I wish we could just focus on that, but it's become overtly political this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, you kind of have to absorb everything about anyone you kind of associate with. I was at an event the other day and Sebastian Gorka was at the event and I posted a picture and people are like, oh, you're such a right winger. It's like, no, I'm at events with a lot of different types of people. But on that constitutional issue, to put it to bed, if there is a law or an action, for instance, during the pandemic, when the governor, was continuing some of these mandates, or gun control issues, if there is a state law that you feel like inherently goes against the Constitution, how do you navigate that?
We use discretion. That's what everybody misses in this whole thing. We as police officers, deputy sheriffs in the state of Washington, we still have discretion. So let me phrase, you brought up Second Amendment gun. We've passed some very strict legislation here. Am I bound because that went through our legislative process and the governor signed? You bet I'm bound by that. And I have no problem saying that. But where do you think the community in Snohomish County wants the sheriff focusing on? Violent felons that are already committing violent crimes and carrying guns, or what would otherwise be lawful gun owners, what might have a magazine above capacity or something like that. Where should I focus my limited resources on? It's going to be on the former, the felons that are in possession of firearms unlawfully and committing violent crime. It's all about discretion for me, Brandi.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the same would be true if there were businesses violating the stay home mandate. It's up to you whether you actually go in and were to go against and shut those businesses down or take action.
Yeah, and I know my opponents use that as a negative for me, right? And I look back on that, and it was the pandemic, different time in our history. It's almost hard to put ourselves back in there because 3 years has gone by. And I probably didn't, I would change my wording. I'll just put it that way, right? Brand new sheriff, that kind of thing. But I didn't like what was going on. And I can explain it real briefly. Is our government, one person governor, actually, not government. Remember, these weren't laws. These were things that he dictated by the emergency process. And initially, everybody, we all complied. Absolutely, we did, because we weren't sure what was going to happen with the pandemic. But as weeks and months went on, it became very clear that the government was picking winners and losers. That's what I have a problem with. If it's okay for the government to go out and make a living for your family, why can't a private sector person at least have the choice, Brandi, right? If you're worried about the pandemic and you run a business in Snow County, stay home. It's okay. But if you run a excavator and you're developing property out in the middle of nowhere and you're by yourself, I thought that person should have the right to go out and work. So I decided to say something about it. That's all. And then it got super political. That's the part I regret. I didn't mean it to be political. I wanted to support people. And a lot of people miss this real quick. This little part of this is the Snohomish County Courthouse was under construction during that time. And did you know they didn't miss a day? Because they were a government contract.
Yep.
But if you were across the street from the Snohomish County Courthouse and in the private sector, the government shut you down and you couldn't provide for your family. I just thought the government should treat people fairly. That's all.
Yeah, you're going to hear no disagreement on that from me. And I do think it's funny that is still used as a negative, because now I think in the light of day, all these years later, I would argue that a majority of people understand that those measures were too extreme. And so to sort of go back and say, well, Adam 42 years ago said this was too extreme. I'm like, well, it was, well, it was, you know. I want to ask you about one more thing, because I think it plays into this media unfairness. And I've seen this with a lot of different stories where the media will cover something like a dog on a bone and, talk about it all the time. And then if ultimately it doesn't end in the way, like court cases and stuff, that they wanted it to, or that their narrative was pushing toward, then they just sort of forget about it, right? And there was, so you've been criticized in part for rehiring 3 deputies who were fired under your predecessor. And I actually remember when I was at Fox 13, you and I had an interview, and I don't think you particularly liked my line of questioning, but I did my job. I asked you about these. We talked about it. It was one of our first interviews. But one of them was a deputy who fatally shot someone after a police chase. And this story has been used a lot because you ended up hiring him back. It's been used a lot to suggest that you're sort of unfit for the job and you're fine rehiring bad cops. But a couple months ago, the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission actually released a review of that use of force incident, and they found that there was nothing to prove that it was improper. Yet how much news coverage did that get?
None. There's no other way to say it. It got none. I listen, Brandi, I have stood by those decisions. I didn't hide behind those decisions. I actually, when I made them, I held a press conference and I stayed until all the questions were asked and answered by me. And then I lived with the criticism for the better part of 4 years.
I remember that press conference.
Especially with the Everett Herald. It seems like they can't mention my name without saying the sheriff who rehired all these, right? In a negative context, right? I stand by the decision. It was the right thing to do, because what we ask of our deputy sheriffs, we already ask a lot of them. Right? We never want them to be in this position that I would describe as a critical incident. But when they are, if something was wrong, so be it. Fine, we can deal with that. But if they did everything right, we should just come out and say that. And that's where my opponent and we completely disagree on this, because she did have a say on that back in the day when it happened, 2018, 19. But I've lived with that criticism. And so no one knows that, it was over 2 years ago where the state of Washington came to us, and under the new process, so in the legislation of 2021, they can now go back in history and review all this stuff. And there are so many complaints out there. This was one of the first this is a big deal. Someone lost their life. It's incredibly important that we get it right. This is one of the first big investigations they took on at the state of Washington, the Criminal Justice Training Center. They've had it for 2 years. And when they asked me for this, one, we're required by law to give this stuff. And I have no problem with that. I think that's a good thing. But when my team came to me and said, Adam, they're asking for all that, I said, give them everything. I am so glad someone else besides me, the former sheriff, is going to look at this. That's how confident I was, Brandi. And now, unfortunately, it took a long time to get to it, but I understand why. They reviewed every piece of evidence. And then in August of this year, they come out with a very simple 2-page explanation. And I'm paraphrasing here, but man, I got it right, Brandi. I was 1,000% right in this. And let me tell you, my burden was much higher than theirs. If they wanted to, what they could do is suspend or get rid of a peace officer certification. It's a very low burden of proof for them. If there was anything wrong in what I did or what the investigation showed there was some wrongdoing, they would have. Don't you think they would have done it? The state of Washington and kind of the climate we've been in 4 years.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They unequivocally cited that the evidence matched what the deputy said, and that goes to our policy. It goes to state law. When these things happen, that is what we're judged on.
Yeah. And then after years of this coverage that criticizes your decision and paints you in a particular light for that decision, just crickets when it's deemed that your decision was accurate. And I think that goes to an inherent bias in the current media climate that's really just disappointing. As a former journalist, really disappointing to see. Let's end with this, because I guess it is disappointing that all of these things have distracted from what should be the only thing that matters in this, is public safety and who is going to keep Snohomish County more safe. So for you, when you look back at the last 4 years, do you feel like you have done an adequate job of trying to keep the people of your county safe?
Absolutely, yes. And this is what I mean by that, is that, man, I've been doing this for 27 years now. I have never seen anything like it. The last 4 years of public safety. Okay, but it's been tough. All right. You've covered it. The media's covered it. But man, I had to deal with this coming in, and I took office January 1st of 2020, and then boom, the whole world of public safety changed after that. But after going through all of that, we are better off and stronger than we were when we started. And not only that, we've turned a corner at the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. We have. We don't want to take a step back in time. And that's exactly what it would. It's the same old names, the same stuff. We have turned a corner, and we have not shied away from being out there providing very strong and proactive public safety services to the residents of Snohomish County at a time when there were times in 2020 and 2021 and into 22, it was very uncomfortable to do so. We still did it. And you know what? We did all of the accountability stuff too, which I'm okay with. People miss that a lot. Adam just wants to go off and be tough on crime and all that kind of stuff, which I do. Absolutely. I stand by that. But we have done the amount of scrutiny that the police profession has faced in the last 4 years. We have acknowledged that. We have been transparent. We have expanded what we do internally at the sheriff's office. We've brought body cams in. What better transparency for accountability than body cams? We're the ones who made it happen. So we have done some, I think, incredible things, being strong on public safety, but also being compassionate to the people in our community who need it. I have become, people tell me, my command staff tells me this all the time, I've almost become so much more liberal than I used to be. I don't like those labels and stuff like that. But I love the compassion piece of what we do now and what I've been able to bring in that area to the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, which is some stuff that's just never been done before. It's been unique. I think we're kind of the leading edge on public safety and what we're doing to help people. And so I'm just as big a fan as that as I am out there fighting crime.
Yeah, I'll take issue with that because I don't know that liberals, their version of compassion in Seattle is actually compassion. When I see their version of compassion, people dying on the streets, that is the opposite of compassion to me. And so no one has the market cornered on true compassion, but I definitely think that there is a difference of definition of what that compassion means, certainly.
With fentanyl, it's not only not compassion, you're exactly right. It's inhumane. It's to the point of it's inhumane what we're doing to some of these big cities and things like that.
Yeah, so Snohomish County Sheriff Adam Fortney, since the Everett Herald chooses to run a hit piece on you a week out from the election, we're going to try to right the ship a little bit. We'll be doing some sign waving in Linwood today. What time, where should people go?
3:30 p.m., the intersection of 196th Street Southwest, 44th Avenue West. There's a great big Fred Meyer there. Can't miss it. Lots of parking, easy access. I'm hoping I have enough signs. I've got a lot of signs, trust me, but I'm expecting a big turnout. So we would appreciate anyone's help. If you're tired of this kind of, well, what you said, it's a hit. It's an absolute hit piece. There's just no way around it. If you're tired of that kind of reporting, if I can't even call it that with a straight face, come out and show your support today.
Yeah, that made this a bigger issue, certainly for us. So we'll see you there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandi, for everything.
Yeah, see, just all you have to do as a candidate is get attacked by the mainstream media and unfairly labeled, and Nicole and I will round up the posse and we'll come out and wave signs for you.